The memorial gets over 4 million visitors a year. It wasn't built until 2004, 59 years after World War II ended. Here you can see two 43-foot pavilions, one for the Atlantic, one for the Pacific, on opposite sides of what they call the Rainbow Pool, in honor of the over 400,000 troops, American troops, who died in World War II.
And despite the loss of life, many from America's greatest generation look back on their service as something special that helped shape their lives. And while their memories may have endured, some of those same vets are more concerned about today's soldiers and that they may be much worse off.
The service is something special. Being in the service is something special that you'll never forget. Very rough life in the military, and today the young kids that are in there are very, very bad. The war is, like they say, war is hell, isn't it?
You don't want to look back on it as bad times. You want to look back on it as good times. It's something that you learn, you profit from, if you have the right mind. A lot of people, they look back and they hate it. When I look back at it, it's something that brought me through life, experienced life, being a better person. It made me much better, I'm sure of that.
I recently had the chance to speak with one of today's combat veterans. Joining me now, Pete Hexet. He's CEO of Concerned Veterans for America. Pete, what about that? Let me ask you, because you've been deployed 3 times since 9/11. Do you look back on it and hate it, love it? How do you feel about it?
It's always a mixed feeling. There's such a sense of purpose in what you're doing with the guys and gals you're with, the mission you have, the country you're defending, a difficult task, complex situations but you know what? He's right. You look back on the good stuff. I mean, and even the difficult stuff back, you look back and realize what you were in the middle of, what you were attempting to do, how significant it was, and how important the sacrifice is of those who left it all and gave it all and what they were giving it for. So I concur with what that World War II veteran said. You look back with honor on what you did, as difficult as it may have been.
How about the first veteran who suggested he's worried, that your generation has had it really rough?
I just look at that and kind of smile, because I look at the World War II generation, and he's going to look at me and tell me I had it rough. Here's the guy who, deployed against the biggest, baddest military the world's ever seen, scaling beaches and Pacific theaters to defeat Hitler's army, the greatest army on the planet at that time. And you know what? We did one-year tours. You didn't do a one-year tour in World War II. You were in until you were wounded, killed, captured, or was complete.
That's a good point.
It's a very different dynamic. I mean, it's not to take away from the tours of today, but it was a theater you were in for the duration, unless something happened.
And you were far away without the ability, really at all almost, to communicate with your loved ones back at home back in the day.
A very different situation for both the service member and the family. I'm able to go to Iraq or Afghanistan and then dial up Skype at a local call center and call back to my family. My grandmother, whose husband was in a post-World War II he was in World War II, but after the fighting, was in Germany for 2 months before she heard from him, and that was a written letter. And they were married 2 months before that. I mean, the time, the patience, the uncertainty, the anxiety that comes with it is on a whole nother level from what vets of today experience. And it cuts both ways. When you're not talking to folks back home, it's easier to be detached and more focused on what you're doing. But man, that's difficult, and I wouldn't want to have had to have been deployed under those circumstances.
Do you feel like we are losing something, some sort of, not respect for our military, but sort of love of our military? Back in World War II, it seems like the whole country rallied behind them. All of the states, everybody was behind the mission at that point, because it seemed clear what we needed to do. And today we're so divided, and that's carried over a bit. Certainly we saw it in Vietnam, and even today, to some extent, towards our soldiers and those who fight.
There's a reverence around that World War II generation. I know part of the reason I joined in the first place, I don't come from a military family. I used to sit on the curb in Wanamingo, Minnesota, and watch that Memorial Day parade, Veterans Day parade. And it was those proud World War II veterans who would walk down the street and get the standing ovation. People looked at that and said, they did something. They saved the world, and we're so proud of what they did. And we unfortunately unlearned a lot of those lessons of Vietnam, but we've relearned them for vets of our generation. And so some of that reverence is back. But it's a little different in that these are the guys that saved the world. These are the guys that left everything behind, lost 400,000, Megan. We lost almost 5,000 in our generation. It's not to take that. But think of the scale and scope of 400,000 families and communities who gave so much. I think there's a fundamental understanding of the cost of freedom as it's associated to World War II.
And yet you went and fought after, 9/11, after 3,000 Americans were killed on domestic soil. And you and others like you went over and fought for our country and what we stand for. And so it's very similar in many ways to what we saw in World War II. Happily, as you point out, with respect to our Iraq and our Afghanistan veterans, it does seem like there's been a turn since what we saw after Vietnam. Some lessons were learned by most people. And there was a story just recently, just to end it on a happy note, about a bunch of guys, a bunch of Marines who are coming back from Afghanistan. And not only were there some sort of makeshift tributes performed for them on their route because they had to stop over, but all the passengers in this first-class flight gave up every single one of their seats so the Marines could sit up.
I get chills just hearing that. I mean, that to me is an example of citizens who get it, who understand, who say, hey, this is something these guys deserve. And, you know, I try to do the same thing. I've got a 3- and a 1-year-old boy. Every time I see a World War II veteran, I try to get them next to him to take a photo. I want them to touch that and understand that piece of history, how significant it was. And the same with me. I've taken photos of World War II veterans every chance I get because of what it means and what they did.
You see a vet, World War II vet or a younger vet, pay it forward. Pay it forward. Pete, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Megan.